Thanks for joining. This should be a really fun conversation. We're going to talk all about Microsoft Teams Contact Center and different options. Obviously, it's now public, the new Dynamics 365 Contact Center. The Qs app is in preview, so lots to talk about in this space. And joining me is Alistair. Alistair, do you want to give a bit intro, a background, what you do at Pure?
Sure, yeah. At Pure IP, I look after a few different teams, which kind of cross-section of team services, really. So I look after the guys that do the deployment and support of our Teams voice services, and then also the teams that roll out the on-site SBCs, and then the project management that kind of wrap all around that.
Awesome. And I'm Tom Arbuthnot. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I co-found a company called Empowering Cloud, where we look at kind of Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365. I'm also a solutions director at Pure IP as well. Although Alistair is the far more knowledgeable one on this call, I'm just going to be quizzing him. That's the plan. So let's have a look at what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to kind of go through what's happening with UCaaS and CCaaS and how they're coming together. Then we're going to talk about some different contact center scenarios. Contact center is such a broad term. It kind of means everything and nothing. So we'll talk about different customer scenarios we see. Then we're going to get into what's in Teams natively, just Teams core as we'll call it, and then what Microsoft are going to add with the new Qs app, where the ecosystem partners play. And this we've done, work with customers where we deployed different platforms. We've integrated to them from a PSTN point of view as well. So what's the difference between connect and extend? What are the capabilities there? Where do they continue to add value? And finally, we'll talk about the new Dynamics 365 kind of Copilot type contact center and where Microsoft are aiming to play there. As I said on the intro, there's no live chat here, but we do have the Q&A box going, and I can see that. So please feel free to just fire in questions as we go. If there's any particular topics you want us to talk about, fire them in there and we'll keep an eye on them. So I will stop sharing because I've just got an agenda deck. So I guess, Alistair, while I stop sharing, the UCaaS and CCaaS, obviously from a Pure IP perspective, we've been doing voice into UCaaS for years and years, and UC before it was UCaaS, Link and Skype for Business, and connectivity to contact center. And I think it's fair to say that historically those have been separate projects, but it feels like increasingly those are overlapping, coming together. Is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I would say so. I suppose it may be a slight sort of differentiation of the term. It's like when we talk about contact center nowadays, that tends to talk about all these different types of kind of activities that you would see in the contact center. So the omni-channel, basically. But if you were to maybe go back a little while and we're focusing a bit more on the call center side of things, I'd definitely say that if we were looking at that at this point in time, because there's been improvements in functionality on enterprise voice, there's been improvements on functionality on contact centers, and some contact centers leverage enterprise voice. You've kind of seen some of those coming together a little bit. It's not so easy to kind of pick apart. If a customer wants or a business wants to implement sort of like call center, contact center, it's not always so straightforward, whereas it would have been probably a few years ago. But I think it's maybe coming from some of the margins. So it's about taking a service and almost like going a little bit off piece with it, innovating a little bit, maybe using it for something that it wasn't quite intended for. Enterprise voice, it wasn't intended to be a contact center. It's called enterprise voice for a reason. But
yeah,
I think people trying to make enterprise voice into contact center is quite an interesting game. It's not a new one necessarily. People were trying to do it with response groups for a while, but I think things are getting better.
I think response groups set that trend, didn't they? Because you had Link or Skype for Business was seen as a PBX replacement, and different PBXs had different, more advanced routing capabilities, and response groups actually gave quite a lot of power to be able to do advanced routing scenarios. So that was kind of, as you say, there's a good distinction there between call center and contact center. That was call center light. There wasn't tons of reporting, but there was some good power there. and that flowed through to Teams a little bit with queues and attendance. But also other UCaaS platforms have this scaling feature set where they start to roll in advanced routing, contact center light as part of their story. So you
Yeah.
do see customers thinking about this as, oh, I'm expecting my UCaaS to have some call center s capabilities potentially.
Yeah, I think there's been a growing expectation on what customers believe is an enterprise voice feature set, and to a certain extent also the enterprise voice feature set has been under fire ever since Teamcare went live, hasn't it? It's a lot of sort of naysayers saying, well, Teams isn't ready for enterprise voice because it doesn't do X, Y, and Z that
Mm.
an old PBX system does, but it's more about this sort of cloud journey, and I think in that cloud journey customers have started to maybe open up new ways that their businesses can work, and it's kind of put not pressures but put expectations on the service. It's like, well, it's a telephony platform. Why can't it deliver me all these calls, and why can't it look at the call number and deliver it to different people based on the call number, or different people based on skills, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's the feature sets have been increasing, but I kind of feel like the market's expectation of enterprise voice has been sort of changing slightly as well.
Yeah, and that's useful. So you talked about call center versus contact center, and it's quite a spectrum of expectations and capabilities from like
Mm.
I guess like a more of an informal scenario if you want to box it to more of a formal scenario. And you kind of have three scenarios or three customer types you talk about. So how do you break down these three kind of scenarios on a spectrum?
Yeah, so as you say, I would sort of see the informal contact center as like the entry point. It's still an intention, and that intention is for like a business unit, a group of people to achieve certain targets. So irrelevant of whether the technology is a contact center or enterprise voice, it's still a business unit trying to achieve those. And what you see with that is essentially queuing, grouping of people, but a little bit of measurement and control, a little bit more than say if it was just a sort of single number for a department. There's a bit more going on in that function. So the first steps really it's groups of users, it's queues in a response group type of way, and I'd say with that comes maybe a little bit of reporting. So there's a sort of expectation of that. But what they're not really doing is kind of going into a lot of the really heavy feature sets. It's not an omni-channel, so we're still talking call center, and it's not necessarily doing some of the kind of more difficult queue treatment. So that's the sort of entry level bit.
Hmm.
Where response groups have been, Teams is kind of there, and depending on how you deploy it, and then obviously it's going more towards this sort of direction as well. But then the next level up, I think, is what you've got mid, I'd sort of say mid market or mid level call or contact center, and this is where you've then got to make that move into like this is definitely a contact center space. You know, you're after omni-channel. You're really wanting to do like skills-based routing. There's lots of queue reporting. That you want to have that agent supervisor feel. That's quite a difference from enterprise telephony over contact center. But I think that the key bit in this next sort of sector is that more often than not, you're still leveraging your telephony from your enterprise voice. So you haven't jumped to a completely new system. There are some out there, definitely, but here what we could talk about is it still being a Teams contact center? It's third party. It's outside of the native capability of Teams, but
Mm-hmm.
still working with Teams. And then beyond that, I would say the next level up is where things like really get serious. You know, you're looking at probably a lot of complexity, maybe with databases, screen popping, a lot of omni-channel, or it might just be pure scale. So if you go to a next level up, a lot of the times you end up seeing at the large level, you might have a contact center application, which is only contact center. You know, there's no enterprise voices. All the telephony is dealt with on that platform itself, and it's almost sort of slightly separate from enterprise voice, and has got all the features probably and all the costs to go with it as well. They're the
Yeah.
kind of three levels that I think occur more often than not.
And from a pure IP perspective, we've got customers kind of in all those buckets, haven't we? Obviously, lots of teams focus here, so lots of teams customers just pushing what they can do core in the box. Lots of that middle ground teams certified contact center, and then some customers that where more we're doing the PSTN connectivity for them, but they're into one of the, like you say, standalone, big complex contact centers as well.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously to point out on those first two, direct routing, operator connect. I mean, really, if you wanted to use calling plans, it doesn't really matter too much. It's all of that Teams kind of enterprise voice architecture is relevant. So yeah, we've got the split across all of those, even getting into that mid market bit with, whether it's API or SIP.
Yeah. So if I'm a customer and I'm like, I've got, if I've got the super formal high end scenario, I probably already know about it, because I've got multiple seats, I've got supervisors, I've got some complexity. Where it gets interesting is this informal to formal, or knowledge worker plus to formal kind of middle
Yeah,
ground. So let's talk about what you get straight in the box out of Teams. We'll say Teams Core, so Teams without the premium
yeah.
license, because you do get quite a lot of power there with the auto attendance and call queues, right?
Yeah, this has been like a growing feature set across years. Obviously, when direct routing first came out, it didn't have any of this, and over time, it's just added more and more sort of features in. But I think that in order to deploy an informal contact center on Teams, you've probably got to connect the dots between a few different things that have been going on over the last few years. So if as an example, if you implement a call flow via Teams at the moment, you're looking at auto attendance and call queues, all the kind of functionality you've got there. But by default, by the normal mechanisms that most people deploy them, it doesn't end up giving you much of a team sort of feeling. You've got one number or multiple numbers coming in, and they're being distributed between different kind of queues and groups of people, but there isn't there are definitely some limitations like with group call history, that kind of stuff, and really just feeling like there's no real sort of supervisor agent sort of feel to it. But so if you were to take that base core set of functionality, as in the auto tenant and call queues, even just the first part where you say, right, well, we're going to get them to deliver via Teams channels.
Hmm.
The minute you do that, it's quite interesting because you break out your calls into an area, obviously a Teams channel, but it's an area where all of those users are, and they start to feel a little bit more connected. They have
So this
some
is this
group
is
kind of
voice enabled
quality.
channels you're talking about. So we're still in
Yes.
Teams Core, but it's essentially, if you think of your auto attendant as your, press one for sales, press two for accounts, your call queues as groups that get routed to, attendant routing, serial routing, round robin. What the it was called collaborative calling for a while, voice enabled
Yeah.
channels.
Yeah.
It's a visual of what's going on with
Yeah.
the current calls.
And that matters quite a lot. I think the visual, being able to see that you're almost using a different role or a different sort of persona, if you like. So I personally, I think it kind of helps. But then once you've got your calls into that kind of area, you've then got some other options that you can combine with it. So on the kind of call center feel, and the sharing of numbers, you can enable those users with shared calling, or you can look at the call on behalf of queue functions, and those are really just making sure that it's kind of solidifying the usage that those users are performing in that call queue. And then you kind of combine it slightly a little bit more with authorized users. So that's something that came in the last year to allow some administration. It's quite light, but some administration of the call queues. Again, it just helps if you're a supervisor of a group of people that are performing within this informal contact center, then yeah, you've got some access to be able to do some of that yourself if you're not a Teams admin. And then I think once you've got that, so you've got your shared space, you've got a little bit of supervisory functionality, and then you've got the Power BI dashboards that kind of wrap around it. It is historic. It's not real time, but it is giving you some calling kind of reporting. So I think if you
Yeah.
put all of that together, and it's not costing you anything more, all the licenses are combined in your user license for enterprise telephony. It's quite a good functionality for. You'd see like service desks and maybe IT help desks internally within companies that quite frequently use some of that sort of functionality.
Yeah, I think that's a great use case. Is they're it's IT help desk. They need to route calls to multiple people. They need a bit of an idea about what's going on, but they've not got a real time wallboard. There's not a manager for the contact center. Like it's just 5 people who manage IT calls. That's a great use case for what's in the box.
Yeah.
Two places where it starts to come a little bit unstuck, I think, for customers are configuring it. Like there are some walkthrough wizards now, so it's better than it was. It was all PowerShell to start with, but
Yeah.
it's still non. If you start getting into multiple flows, it's non-trivial to configure. It gets quite complicated holiday dates quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, it definitely does. Sometimes the kind of key with that is trying to keep it simple, but you know when you're in that space of trying to create these informal contact centers versus enterprise telephony, it inherently starts to get a little bit more complicated. So yeah,
Yeah,
we've seen those auto attendants get with like multiple tiers, bouncing around time zones and all sorts. I mean, interestingly, there is a functionality in the call flows now and the call queues that allows you to make an action when there's no agents logged in, and that's definitely a kind of contact center more esque type of scenario. I think that's probably been
yeah,
driven by the way people are using it and sort of asking Microsoft for extra features.
yeah. So there's your starting point. If you're small seat count, I'd say that if there's no contact center manager or department manager who cares that much about what's going on in real time, or they might occasionally look at a report, but they're not going to get super detailed reports. That's a good spot. Microsoft have now kind of stepped up their in the box offering, or I should say they're about to, with the Qs app. So this is a add-on part of Teams Premium, and they're going to add a whole bunch of functionality to start to bridge some of those gaps. Now they're still definitely not saying it's a contact center. They talk about customer engagement. Again, they talk about IT help desk, but they're bringing in some more collaborative call handling, more of a concept of an agent and a supervisor, some role-based access control management, some real-time reporting. So Microsoft is starting to step up there in that kind of definitely still in the informal, but kind of informal beyond. You could technically have a supervisor and agents and start to use that.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion on this, it's a little bit like an operator console. So what an operator console does for Teams is really reworks the views and makes it more functional the role that someone's providing or performing, sorry, with enterprise voice. So like a front of house type of scenario. And I feel like the Qs app is sort of doing that for a contact center type of environment because it's bringing different features together. But putting them up front and center and kind of moving them about so you've got better access to you can put people on hold more easily, you can transform more easily, you can see the team, you can come in and out of the call queue, and those are all things it's not going to bother anyone on enterprise telephony, but it does bother someone if they're using it for a contact center type of environment. And I think it's almost like they've taken the start of the collaborative calling in the Teams channel and sort of seen how that worked, and then said, right, we need to break that out, and it works better being broken out. But
Yeah,
especially, I think the important bit for me is you've got all that functionality, but just the fact that there's some real-time statistics, relevant to the queue, relevant to the agents, relevant to the SLA. Those are big things that this particular sector is really trying to achieve. So just putting that real-time, semi-real-time sort of information in there is a big step forward, I think. And that's not even getting into the things that are coming soon in it.
yeah. So that's it. That's currently in private preview. We've had a bit of a look at that. It's due to come out in August, so that's kind of coming along, part of Teams Premium. But then there's also, we talked about in the kind of Teams contact center world, typically and traditionally that was a certified ecosystem solution. So there are a number of providers that are certified by Microsoft to integrate with Microsoft Teams, give that Teams-like experience and more complex contact center functionality. And Microsoft have three certifications because let's keep it complicated. They have Connect, Extend, and then they have this concept of Power, which isn't really there. Alistair, do you want to take us through those different kind
Yeah.
of certifications?
Yeah, sure. So um, I think I suppose it's mainly the two to start with. So what you've got in those two different frameworks. So Connect is all about combining some more traditional mechanisms for routing your calls. So what you're basically saying is you've got third-party contact center. You're going to integrate it into Teams. There'll be some API integration. But what you'll also do is you'll leverage something like SIP trunking so you can get your calls in and out of the platform. Whereas the extend level, that is going all in on the API, and you send your calls into Teams. They're going to get delivered via direct routing or operator connect or calling plans, and then the minute it's got there, your contact center is going to be able to control them. And I think which one you choose, there's different vendors. Some vendors do both. Some stay on one side or the other. But in my opinion, some of it is really about how comfortable you are with going fully API or not. So, for instance, if you go all in the API and you want to perform a functionality, it's got to be on the roadmap or it's got to be delivered via Microsoft. But if you went for the Connect level, you've got some more. You've almost pulled a little bit of control back. You're still limited because you're essentially delivering it into an enterprise voice system, but you've got much more control back on the contact center to say, I'll perform this function, I'll leave the management of the call somewhere else, and then I'll send it into Teams afterwards. So those two different levels make most of the kind of contact center space for me. Whereas the last one, like we say,
You're
is a bit
quite
of a
right. The
failure
last one
to
is
launch.
Power, which doesn't is still perpetually coming soon. So that's the
Yeah.
concept of a full Azure native solution. The concept's been around for literally a couple of years, but if you check the Microsoft documentation, it's still a coming soon. So you're right, Alistair. It's really between Connect and Power, and I like the way you've explained that there. Connect, really the call is going into the contact center doing all the call treatment, and it's firing the audio down a SIP trunk to Teams. So in that scenario, you or we are trunking into the contact center really, and the contact center is routing over to Teams. Whereas in the
Yeah.
extend model, it's now we can route direct routing, operator connect, all Microsoft calling plans into Teams, and you can kind of push those off to the contact center to manipulate the routing, but it's much tighter integration to Teams at that point.
Yeah, but you might look at the Connect level and be a bit worried about the complexities of that, but that is still it's still possible to go to a partner like Pure IP who has links into these kind of contact centers already, and it simplifies the sort of setup. So it doesn't necessarily make it any more complicated. It's just different.
And let's talk about that, because the team have done quite a lot of work to pre-integrate to some of those contact centers. So what does that mean to the customer?
So, as an example, then we've got some suppliers, some partners, sorry, that we work with, whereby we've got this kind of concept of super trunks. So we've got the trunks already set up between us and them. We've got it tested out for not only the contact center platform, that specific platform, but also Teams and also us, and it's essentially all ready to go. It's just ready there to be lit up. So you don't have to kind of get this new contact center out of the box, figure out what all the requirements are, figure out how you work with your SIP provider, get the both of them together, get it working. With our platform, you're basically or our service, you're spinning up a new instance of your contact center. It works immediately with the calling, and you're starting to push numbers on. So what you're doing is you're spending less time on those kind of starting setups, and you're spending more time on queue treatments or experiences or all those kind of things. So it does improve the setup time quite a lot more. And with cloud services, everyone wants them to be set up quickly, and everyone expects them to be set up quickly. So that's just a kind of approach that we can perform with those.
And from a customer perspective, so the customers that come into these third-party contact centers, I think something's a bit unique about Pure IP is we obviously have some relationships with the contact center vendors. We've done some pre-integrations, but we're also open to providing connectivity to, obviously, directly to Teams. You can go to any of the extends. We can trunk to other solutions. So we don't have one vendor we're saying this is the right solution. We don't have to push you buying a third party versus using Teams Core or using queues. We're kind of, and even Dynamics we'll talk about in a minute. We've done all of them, so there's no particular push from us to go one way or the other. Or even I guess we have customers that mix and match. They use some core stuff and some, some contact center third party stuff.
Yeah, even multiples. And that's not necessarily that uncommon, like as you're migrating from one platform to another and that kind of stuff. But the other side that we can do quite well with that is say you've got one number range and you're splitting it between enterprise voice, an old call center, a new call center, and you can just pair those numbers off one by one and send to the right direction. So you can get your cloud services spun up, you can get your numbers routed in the right direction, and you can change them quite easily. So it all kind of works for a kind of a fast movement of all this sort of stuff.
And some of the features as a customer that are going to put you in this camp are, typically, real-time reporting, wallboards, advanced queue treatment, and potentially omni-channel CRM integration. There's a whole bunch going on in the space around AI, compliance recording. These are things that are not in the Teams core, or they're starting to creep in queues up in some cases. But if you've got a bunch of these features, you're probably more likely to be into this certified ecosystem contact center solution.
Yeah, definitely. The big one for me would be well, two big ones. Sorry. The first one would be routing. If you're looking at skills-based routing, routing based on numbers, routing based on anything really, database lookups, that sort of stuff's definitely not in Teams at this point in time. If you can perform all of that intelligence in the routing and then send it to Teams, great, it'll deliver the call, but it can't make those kind of decisions. So that definitely puts you into a contact center, third-party contact center sort of space, like we just talked about. And then I think secondly, if you're wanting to go kind of fairly customized on your reporting, you're trying to meet certain business OLAs, SLAs, targets. I think you probably need to be in this sort of space. The Power BI dashboards and some of the real-time stuff in the Qs app are good, but they're a little bit more out of the box. Whereas, if you've got some very specific ideas and requirements, or you've maybe highly customized your existing system and you're moving to something new, I think that puts you into this sort of space.
Yeah, I think a rule of thumb I tend to have is, like, if you've got someone who's managing the contact center, like, and almost immediately you're into, like, oh, okay, like, they're going to want this particular wallboard and this particular report, and they want to report by product line and business group and country, and like as soon as you start hearing things like that, or PCI compliance, or outbound, or messages in queue, like anything like that, you're immediately like, okay, I'm beyond what's in, as you say, enterprise voice. I'm now into a dedicated solution.
Yeah, I think realistically, if you've got that function in place and you were to give them some of the out of the box kind of stuff, I don't think it would necessarily resonate with them. I think they would be wanting for more, and there have been sort of various companies and people out there trying to use informal contact center and trying to reach to the next level. I think it's been that group of people trying to push the bounds that have kind of tried to kind of push this to the next level. And maybe the Qs app and maybe Power BI, it's all kind of getting developed all the time. So it is pushing the new features to take them there.
And the next step up is a massive leap into the kind of the formal, complex, advanced contact center, whatever we want to call it, because suddenly you're going from, I've already got Teams and I've got Teams Phone, and I'm adding on a license for contact center in the tens of dollars, probably, potentially, the 30, 50, 70, into the 100, 130, 150 dollars for a full-time contact center. And this is where you're completely changing the user experience. So with everything we've talked around Teams, the experience is embedded and integrated in Teams. That's great for users who are not full-time dedicated agents, because they understand Teams, they get fed their queues, whether they're on at home, whether they're at work. It's part of their business workflow. I think where the formal comes in is they're going to be writing call notes, call wrap up time. They're going to be
Yeah.
coached. They're going to have knowledge bases. Like they're full time, headset on, smashing the phones, being chased for each call, that kind of scenario.
Yeah, definitely. And you do need to wrap things around for those. Generally, like you were saying around the queue treatments, you'd find some of those having some queue treatments that are beyond sort of teams. But the functionality, that agent supervisor functionality gets taken to the next level. You could be looking at requirements for like barge and whisper or listening, that sort of stuff. And those you're not going to necessarily get those from any kind of informal contact. And you're going to have to start putting other things onto teams to achieve anything near that sort of requirement.
And so that kind of brings us into what Microsoft are now positioning with the Dynamics 365 contact center. So for history's sake, Microsoft had Dynamics Contact Center Platform, which was using Dynamics Azure Communication Services, which is the foundational service for Teams, Nuance, Power Platform, some other bits and pieces to bring together a contact center solution kind of tied to Dynamics. And we've got a couple of customers who've done that, and we can trunk into Azure Communication Services, and that trunks through to Dynamics. So we've done some of that. But Microsoft just last week announced Dynamics 365 Contact Center, which is actually separating the need for Dynamics CRM and allowing integration into other solutions. So this is very much, again, Microsoft aiming at the high end of contact center. Unsurprisingly, loads of talk about AI, loads of talk about Copilot, agent coaching, mid-call, dynamic knowledge base lookup, even customer-facing AI.
Yeah, there's lots of suggestive stuff, isn't there? You could see how some of that AI and some of that intelligence could assist some of those workflows, chatbots and assisting agents, suggesting next actions. But it's like you say there, by creating that platform and separating out, it's absolutely not Teams telephony, it's not Enterprise Voice, it's its own platform. Linked straight into ACS. It feels like they're kind of pretty much toe to toe with the sort of the bigger kind of contact centers.
Yeah, definitely.
Microsoft's angle is AI, isn't it? Which could be really interesting to see. Kind of
Yeah, in
rolled
theory,
over
that could be their
6-12 months.
superpower because they're investing so much in AI. If they're up against a Genesis or a Five9 or another big contact center vendor, is that their differentiation? That they're relatively new to that big, big space. And when I say big can mean not high number of seat counts, but big can also mean complexity. Like it needs to integrate to our website, it needs to deal with this product catalog, it needs to deal with multilingual agents. Like it can be big in terms of complexity of business requirement as well.
Yeah, definitely. And at the end of the day, if you have some of that in place, you may well be using CRM anyway. And if you're using CRM, yes, it's separate this, but it's going to integrate the best of any of them. So it's probably a good shout from that perspective as well.
Definitely. So that hopefully gives people an understanding of where this sits. So we've kind of gone from I just need some more advanced routing. I have multiple people answering phone calls for my business or my IT help desk into this kind of middle ground of, quite capable contact center functionality, but they're still people who live in teams. They're informal or they're a little bit formal. It's a dozen agents, a couple of dozen agents into the I need omni-channel, I need PCI compliance, I need my agents to have this particular layout and see this knowledge base, do this thing into the proper formal. And that's where, certainly Microsoft are aiming with the Dynamics 365 Copilot contact center. But that's where it gets into competitiveness with the other big, there's not, although it's on, as you said rightly, although it's on the same underlying platform as Teams, it's a different solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So we've got a bit of time for questions, so feel free to throw questions in the chat if you've got any around that. Alistair, what would you say for customers? I guess we've got a lot of people on this session. I imagine some are probably on the Teams journey, obviously, because it's pure IP and we're so focused on Teams. They're considering their options between in the box, the ecosystem solutions. Maybe they need the high-end solution. where, if you were having kind of a consulting call with your customers, where would you start thinking about how to box out what might suit where?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it would probably depend upon what could be achieved in terms of like dual running and stuff. So if we had the ability to be able to run the existing contact center, but we're rolling out in Teams and we could get our hands on some of the features that we've just been talking about in informal, I'd be tempted to at least set up a proof of concept with some of the functions we've talked about with the Queues app. In time where they're talking about more AI in it and some other functionality, maybe start layering in some Teams compliance-based recording too, which has got some interesting AI bits in too. So if you're able to, I would try that. The things that would straight away put me off that would be if the company are already doing something outside of the routing capability of Teams. If it's skills-based routing, if it's database-based routing, straight off the bat, unfortunately,
Straight to
you'd
third
be,
party.
yeah. And again, reporting. If you've got a heavy reliance on that, then it would be straight away into that. But I feel like over the next maybe 6-12 months, there might be quite a few places that will at least try and do that proof of concept and try and check it out. Can it meet some more needs? It's worth a try, isn't it? Because you could have something that might be more, maybe it's more simplistic from the perspective of all these different products, or maybe it's hitting a certain cost point that's improved. It could be either, but yeah, that's what I try and do. Hopefully we'll get loads
Yeah,
of
I
these
think.
through in the next 6 months, and we'll
Yeah,
knock
yeah.
it
We'll
out.
have to when the Q's app launches. We'll have to give it a few months and then talk about some customers that are using it and
Yeah,
where they found it. I think I agree with all of that. I think that's a really good place to start, and you're starting to justify why I need the investment. A very practical piece of advice would be, if you're the person using the tool, then or the person using the tool is invested in experimenting and pushing together Power BI reports and is up for that, then like absolutely you can save the business some money, you can drive some value there. If you're the delivery team delivering to a person who uses this tool, you might want to consider, are they up for saving $50 a user and experimenting, or do they just care about their end result and they're like, actually I want to buy something that's weathered and tried and tested and I want to have a third
yeah,
party on the hook for it and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
a
That's
very
true.
practical non-technical one of who's the customer and who's ready for that level of experimentation.
Yeah, I mean, you never. I don't think you'd ever take one of the scale we've just been talking about, those three different areas. I think if you had something right at the top, I think you'd be crazy to try and fit it into the bottom. But
Yeah.
if you're working in the kind of margins between each of those, you could maybe kind of try and see if there's a slight difference in
And this is
solution.
where the beauty of where the market is at the moment as well. From a testing point of view, you've obviously got what's in the box. You can add some premium apps later in the year relatively easily. But the third party solutions, I remember back, going to date myself now, the UCCE, UCCX call manager days.
Cool,
It was
manager.
like 6 weeks of scripting, 8 weeks of scripting to configure a contact center. We're
Yeah,
not there anymore. Some of the popular SaaS solutions, the Extend solutions, they can be up and running in literally, we've done it live on webinars before, end to end deployed. Now that's not configuring your queues and obviously that piece, but you're talking hours of deployment, not weeks of deployment. So it's quite possible to proof of concept this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even in that mid sector that I was talking about, I've seen and experienced some of the visual call flow creations. So you can like drag and drop. You can kind of build a call flow, like you're building a Visio. So that is like a far cry from scripting in UCCX, which was
Yeah.
quite complicated. So yeah, some of this it brings maybe different people into this sort of setup. It maybe brings it more towards the people using it because they can see things visually rather than having to explain it to someone to put in a script. So it's kind of
Yeah, which can be a
interesting
huge,
how
powerful
it could
unlock for
change.
them if
Yeah,
they're up for it to have control over the contact center and the ability to change it at short notice in the way they need for
yeah,
their business unit as well.
absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. We've had a couple of questions come in while we've been talking. One is when's the Q's app coming? So that is due August. It's still in private preview, so I'm not sure if we'll see a public preview yet, but it's still quite a way out yet. But Microsoft have put some blogs and some kind of feature lists out there. Also, how complex would it be to migrate from the Salesforce auto dialer and migrate from TalkDesk to something like a Teams level contact center? And how much would Pure IP help with that process?
The bit that's probably the complex one there is you're talking about outbound straight away. A lot of the contact centers that you're putting in Teams are inbound. So the whole list of contact center providers in that space don't necessarily do outbound. So I'd say first off is probably check out which way you want to go. It's a bit of a difficult one
Yeah,
to
outbound
sort of
is a
say
very
how.
specialist use case. A lot of the
Yeah,
Teams contact centers, it's worth understanding, have been built more with inbound in mind. There are some that can do outbound and auto dialer for sure, but it's definitely worth documenting your requirements there to make sure it sounds like it's pulling from Salesforce, it's firing out those phone
yeah,
calls. That's a very specific scenario.
yeah, I agree.
Awesome. We've had a question around the Dynamics 365 contact center. What is the agent? Is it still, or the agent interface? Is it still Teams? No, actually, there's a dedicated interface for Dynamics 365 contact center users. So it's kind of a web-based dynamic interface. So it's not you're stepping out to full-time contact center agent dedicated to this interface versus Teams integrated. Good question. Cool. A couple more here. What kind of investment are we talking about for the kind of formal context and scenarios? So, Alistair, obviously this ranges based on kind of which vendor and which
Yeah,
solution, but
it
for
does.
those kind of certified solutions, what are you seeing in kind of seat range?
Um, maybe if you were in a sort of sub hundreds, maybe even sort of 50 to 100, and
Yeah,
you were dealing with call center rather than Omni, you could be in maybe like a £50 GBP sort of per user per month sort of area, but so that's giving you the ability to have a third party contact center. It's going to be able to allow you to do skills based routing, link with databases, have that agent supervisor field reporting. So there's quite a lot that comes with it. But then the prices ratchet up a little bit when you're then looking at omni-channel. So the minute you've then got to go from contact call center rather into like socials and emails and text and that kind of stuff, it does ratchet the price up. Um,
yeah.
your starting point between the different vendors can be quite significant as well. You know, you can
Yeah, and
easily sail over
some of them
100.
have very different approaches. Well, some of them do a
Yeah,
per queue model versus a per agent versus a
yeah,
concurrency.
true.
So
Yeah,
yeah, but I think that's a fair ballpark for where you are compared to the higher end, like the $150 is the sort of the higher end of the
yeah.
scale.
I mean, you can get an idea of where those bigger ones would be from even looking at like some of the Dynamics license costs. You know, I know it's not the contact center, but they're pretty expensive
Yeah,
anyway. So that gives you a ballpark. But I think what it also does is maybe puts a stake in the ground around. You're probably not going to pay a lot less than that for the mid tier that we've been talking about. But it's interesting. It's like, well, where does your teams land between, where you are now and that point if you were putting Teams Premium on
mm.
or actually putting call recording into informal contact centers. So giving it some extra functionality there, you're pumping up the functionality, but you're maybe not quite getting to that per user
Yeah.
cost there.
Maybe, or am I prepared to sacrifice some of those more advanced features to save the money, depending
Yeah,
on what my business requirements are?
yeah,
Our last one here, it's quite interesting actually. We've talked a lot about contact center, but the question is, what can we do for teams for more switchboard type scenarios? So, what's the answer there, Alistair?
So it kind of just depends. And the biggest thing that I'd say it depends upon is how that switchboard operates. So, and the reason I say that is is it operating more like a contact center, or is it operating more like enterprise voice? And by contact center, I mean, are they fairly static physically? Are they always there? Are they sort of in shifts, and they always need to answer the phones? Or sometimes front of house can be walking around the building, not necessarily on the phone all the time, and it's not necessarily that it's important to pick up those calls. But if you try and put like a contact center function for someone who isn't going to be there all the time, it's not going to work too well. So I think what you're basically into is do you need contact center in terms of the queuing and the reporting and the structure that provides, or maybe do you need a reworking of the interface? So a bit earlier we were talking about my views about the Q app being a bit of a reworking of the interface for contact center agents. Well, there is operator console and operator consoles from third parties that rework the interface too. And those can be useful for that front of house experience because it means you can link them to Teams call queues, but the actual interface that they're using allows them to like drag and drop and basically when they're touching calls a lot, transferring, putting them on hold, call parks, that is a better sort of interface for them rather than contact center. But yeah, it kind of depends. You need to sort of work out which way they land with that.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so probably worth a longer conversation, but yeah, definitely there are solutions there, and there are some vendors that again have a switchboard kind of mode for their contact centers, and there are some vendors that have a dedicated switchboard app that just ties into Teams without any back end as well. So there are a few
Yeah.
solutions there that are well tested. Awesome. Well, I want to give some time back. Don't want to take the full hour, but hopefully that's been useful for everybody on to understand. We've had some very specific questions. We'll direct message on those around solutions, but I'm very happy to engage one-to-one in conversations about what your requirements are. And again, I think most people on this call know Pure IP, but we can trunk and connect into any and all of those solutions and have live customers on them. And we don't have any, particular, one thing to push. So can absolutely have a conversation about what you can get out of the box natively, what queues might bring you, and where you do need to step up to those, kind of bigger, more complex scenarios. Alistair, anything else to add?
No, I think that's we kind of covered quite a lot of ground there. So yeah, sounds good.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining. We've kept everybody till the end, so hopefully it's been useful. Any comments, questions, or feedback, I'll be doing an email follow-up round. And if you do want to have a one-to-one conversation about your contact center requirements or anything else around Teams, Teams Phone, migrations, all that good stuff, Operator Connect, direct routing, manage SBC, then certainly happy to have that conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.